It began with a silence that felt heavier than space itself, as though the citadel had been holding its breath for countless years. In that silence, a child wandered its long corridors, not yet a man, not yet the figure others would someday whisper about. His steps were small, uneven, sometimes hurried when curiosity pulled him, sometimes dragging when he grew lost in thought. The walls shimmered faintly, as if remembering every word spoken there, yet the boy moved as though none of it mattered. What held his attention were not the grand arches above him, nor the endless rooms of invention, but the faint hum that followed him like a lullaby only he could hear. He never told anyone about it. He didn't have the words. Each night he would lie awake and feel the sound vibrating through the floor, soft as if the stars themselves were whispering. It was not frightening, not urgent, but it pressed against him gently, urging him to listen. Sometimes he wondered if it was simply his own heartbeat echoing louder than it should. Other times he believed the citadel was alive, watching him, the way an old tree might watch a child who climbed into its branches. Loneliness was not unfamiliar to him. Even surrounded by countless versions of himself in this strange place, he felt different. While others seemed eager to chase brilliance through equations and blueprints, he lingered on details they dismissed, the curve of smoke when a machine cooled, the way light bent around glass, the odd beauty of errors. He did not race to be the smartest, nor did he care to win. Instead, he let his strangeness grow quietly, like a plant curling toward unseen sunlight. There was one night, colder than most, when he found a discarded toy in the corner of a hall. It was broken, half of its pieces scattered, no longer capable of the noise it once made. He sat down, legs crossed, and began to tinker. Not to prove himself, not even to restore it fully, but because he felt sorry for it. His small hands worked patiently, listening for that hum beneath the floor, letting it guide him. When the toy whirred faintly back to life, even if imperfect, he smiled softly. He whispered something then, not to the toy, not to himself, but to the space around him, as though thanking whatever gentle presence had guided him there. Years would pass, and people would remember that he had a mind sharp enough to change galaxies. Yet what lived deepest in him was not his brilliance, but that quiet tenderness, the ability to see what others left behind and give it life again. In those early days, the citadel became less of a fortress and more of a cradle. It held his silences, his mistakes, his soft rebellions against the noise of greatness. Every step he took down its dim hallways seemed to weave a thread, binding him to its memory, binding it to him. The boy never spoke of the hum he carried inside him, yet it shaped him more than anyone could see, and in time it would become clear that the citadel had not been humming for anyone else. It had been humming for him. As the boy grew older, the hum did not fade. If anything, it deepened, no longer just beneath the floor but within him, pulsing faintly through his hands whenever he touched metal or glass. He began to notice that when he leaned into the sound, objects seemed to respond. A broken lens would tilt toward him as if waiting for repair. A misaligned circuit would fall back into place with little effort. It wasn't power in the way others imagined. No lightning, no spectacle, but a quiet alignment, like a gentle tide pulling scattered shells back toward shore. He never announced this to anyone. He carried it like a secret lullaby, letting it guide his tinkering. The other children in the citadel rushed ahead with competitions, their laughter sharp, their victories loud. He did not envy them. Instead, he sat with the quiet ones, the ones who looked lost or carried half-finished thoughts in their eyes. With them, he shared the small marvels he built, not grand machines, but soft ones, a light that glowed only when someone touched it with care, a clock that slowed down whenever someone nearby felt lonely. The inventions seemed trivial to others, but to those who held them, they were treasures. There was a girl among them who rarely spoke, her voice thin, as if it had forgotten how to stretch into sound. She carried notebooks filled with unfinished sentences, fragments of things she could not quite say. He gave her the clock that slowed time, and she kept it by her side, smiling faintly each time its hands lagged, as though it allowed her to breathe more slowly. He did not always understand her words, but he understood her silences, and in those silences a bond grew. The hum inside him strengthened when he was with her, as though the citadel itself approved of their quiet companionship. Sometimes they sat in corners where no one else wandered, not speaking, just listening to the faint thrum beneath the walls. He would catch her eyes drifting toward him, soft but questioning, as if she too felt something alive in the silence. Though she never asked, she seemed to know he carried a secret rhythm, and she respected it without needing explanation. Their friendship became a thread he leaned on, invisible yet unbreakable. In her presence, his strangeness did not feel like a burden, but a gift. He began to wonder if the hum had led him to her, if the citadel whispered not only to him, but through him, weaving connections that could not be forced. The boy was no longer entirely alone, though he still carried his solitude like a second skin. Yet as seasons shifted within the citadel's vast halls, a subtle change arrived. The hum, once soft and nurturing, grew more insistent, as though urging him forward. He felt it pressing at the edges of his thoughts, pulling him toward something larger than quiet toys and secret friendships. He did not resist, but neither did he chase it. Instead, he walked with patience, knowing instinctively that whatever lay ahead would not come with thunder, but with the same quiet persistence that had always guided him. And so, step by step, the boy carried his silence, his bond, and his hum deeper into the citadel's labyrinth, unaware that each choice, however small, was already shaping the path of a life that would ripple far beyond those walls. The hum grew with him, no longer just a quiet undercurrent, but a steady companion that shaped the rhythm of his days. He began to notice how it responded to his emotions. When he felt calm, it softened into something like a sigh, and when he felt restless, it swelled until it filled his chest, urging him to act. It was not a voice, not something that told him what to do, but it made his decisions feel less accidental, as if every choice carried a hidden thread leading him somewhere he could not yet see. The girl remained at his side, still writing her unfinished sentences, still guarding her silences as though they were precious jewels. They spent evenings in the citadel's dimmest corners, watching the shadows stretch long across the floors. He showed her how his hands seemed to coax life back into broken things, and though she never asked how, she watched with quiet awe. Sometimes she would rest her hand lightly against his, and the hum inside him would expand, resonating outward until the whole corridor seemed to breathe with them. One evening, while they sat together in the Hall of Mirrors, he caught his reflection, looking back at him in a way that unsettled him. It was not simply his face, but hundreds of variations of it, older, younger, sharper, duller, each flickering faintly in the polished glass. He wondered which of those faces he might become, or if the hum inside him would carry him towards something none of the mirrors could show. For the first time, he felt the weight of choice pressing on him, heavier than before. The citadel, vast and endless, was changing too. Its once familiar corridors seemed to whisper differently, as though carrying secrets too large to be contained. He could sense currents moving under the surface, small tensions, disagreements, the kind of shifts that begin quietly but stretch across years. He didn't fully understand them, but he felt the hum warning him, urging him not to lose his stillness amid the noise of others. His inventions began to reflect this new awareness. He built not just small comforts, but devices that revealed hidden patterns, a lantern that glowed brighter near places of unrest, a set of chimes that rang only when someone nearby was holding back tears. People started to notice, and though most dismissed his work as peculiar, there were those who found themselves drawn to the gentleness of his creations. It was not grandeur, not brilliance in the way the Citadel measured worth, but it reached people in ways louder achievements could not. One night, the girl placed her notebook on his lap, opened to a page where she had written only one line. "You listen differently than the others." He read it twice, then closed the book with care, as though sealing a truth neither of them needed to explain aloud. That moment lingered between them, quiet yet immense, a promise without words. Still as comforting as her presence was, the boy could feel a widening distance growing beyond their quiet corners. The hum pressed harder each day, restless, insistent, pulling him toward paths that stretched further than his familiar solace. He tried to resist, tried to stay in those moments of ease, but the Citadel itself seemed to move around him, guiding him closer to something inevitable. And though he did not yet know it, the life of listening and small kindnesses he carried would soon brush against forces far greater than silence, forcing him to decide whether the hum was simply a companion or a calling. The pressure of the hum became harder to ignore, a quiet tide pulling him further from the safe corners where he once lingered. It no longer waited in the background but pressed at his chest, urging him to notice what others pretended not to see. He began to wander deeper into the Citadel, past the bright halls where voices echoed with pride, into the forgotten wings, where silence was heavier and the walls bore faint marks of age. Dust hung in the air like fragments of memory, and in those neglected places the hum grew stronger, vibrating through him as if the Citadel itself was guiding his steps. The girl followed sometimes, walking beside him without question. She rarely asked where they were going, only watching him with those searching eyes that seemed to know he carried something he could not yet explain. In the quietest halls, she would pause to trace her fingers along the walls, as though she too felt the heartbeat hidden within the stone. She wrote less now, leaving blank pages where words might have been, perhaps trusting that he could hear the silence in her heart without needing it written down. It was during one of these wanderings that he found a chamber unlike the others, its doors sealed but not locked, its air colder than the rest. Inside, relics of older times lay scattered, half-built machines, broken diagrams, fragments of experiments abandoned long ago. He crouched down before a piece of shattered glass, tubing, running his fingers over its sharp edges. The hum surged so strongly that for a moment he thought the chamber itself might collapse, but instead of fear, he felt recognition. These were not failures, they were beginnings, left behind by hands that had once listened as he now did. From that day forward, he returned often to the chamber, piecing together fragments without rushing to restore them. The girl would sit quietly, sketching in her notebook while he worked, capturing not the machines themselves, but the posture of his hands, the tilt of his head as he listened. Slowly, he began to understand that the hum was not just guiding him, it was remembering through him. Every broken fragment, every abandoned relic carried echoes of the same pulse, waiting for someone patient enough to hear. Word of his peculiar devotion began to spread. Some dismissed it as a childish fascination with ruins. Others grew curious, unsettled by his quiet confidence in places they avoided. Whispers followed him, half in admiration, half in doubt, but he paid little attention. What mattered was not how others saw him, but how the hum steadied each time he touched the forgotten. In those relics he found a mirror for his own strangeness, proof that he was not the first to wander through silence, not the first to choose gentleness over triumph. The girl, watching him, began to smile more often, though her smiles carried a weight of knowing. She seemed to understand before he did that his path would not remain with her alone. Sometimes when he looked at her, he saw in her eyes both pride and sadness, as though she already felt the pull of distance yet to come. Still, she stayed by his side, writing fragments she never read aloud, keeping her silence as a gift. And so, with each day, he moved further into the hidden veins of the citadel, carrying not just his own hum, but the resonance of those who came before. What he did not yet realize was that in listening so deeply to what was forgotten, he was already stepping into a role that would reach beyond the quiet halls, into a future neither he nor the citadel could fully contain. The citadel began to change around him. Not in obvious ways. There were no great shifts in structure, no sudden upheavals, but in the quiet ways, spaces once familiar began to feel unfamiliar. The halls that had once echoed with the soft cadence of his steps now seemed to whisper when he passed, their shadows stretching longer than they should. He could hear the hum more clearly now, not just through his hands or his chest, but through the very air around him. It was no longer just a guide, but a pull, leading him towards something he had not yet fully understood. The girl noticed it too, though she said nothing. Her presence beside him had become even quieter, if that was possible. She still wrote in her notebooks, but now the pages were filled with more sketches than words, delicate lines that traced the spaces between them, the subtle shifts in the air, the way the walls seemed to breathe. He wondered if she could hear the hum as well, if it stirred something in her too. He never asked. There were some things words could never explain. One day, while exploring a new passage deep in the heart of the citadel, he stumbled upon an old terminal, its screen cracked and its wires hanging loose. For a moment, he hesitated, unsure if he should even touch it. But something in the hum urged him forward, and his fingers brushed against the cold, broken surface. As if recognizing his touch, the screen flickered to life, casting pale light in the otherwise dark room. The hum deepened, vibrating through him with such intensity that he felt like it might tear him apart or pull him to some distant place. Instead, it calmed, and the screen displayed a single line of text. "What will you become?" He blinked, the words flashing before him. For a long moment, he simply stared, unsure of how to respond. Was it a question for him alone, or for something larger? He had never thought much about what he might become. He had always been content with the hum, with the quiet rhythm of his life, with his connection to the spaces others ignored. But now, in front of the terminal, the question sat heavy in, the air pressing against him. His hands moved on their own. He reached for the old wires, connected them, and as they sparked to life, the hum around him intensified. A low, continuous vibration filled the room, and the screen shifted, displaying new words. Your path is not your own. It was chosen long before you. The realization hit him like a wave, sudden and overwhelming. The hum, the strange connection he had always felt to this place, it wasn't random. It wasn't a coincidence. It was as if everything, every choice he had made had led him here, to this moment. And the path ahead of him was not one he could simply turn away from. He stood, frozen for a long moment, staring at the screen, his mind racing with the implications. The hum, which had once been a soft and guiding presence, now felt like something much larger. It was the pulse of the citadel itself, its lifeblood, its memory, and it was calling to him. As he turned away from the terminal, the girl appeared beside him, her expression unreadable. She had not asked what had happened, had not spoken since. They entered the room, but he knew she had felt the change in the air, too. The citadel had whispered to them both. The path ahead felt unclear, but one thing was certain. The time for silence was over. Whatever lay beyond this moment, it was no longer about tinkering with broken things, no longer about gentle acts of kindness. It was about something larger, something the citadel had been preparing him for all along. And though he did not yet know what that something was, he could feel it deep within him. The hum had become a roar. The citadel felt different now, as though it had become aware of him in ways he had never imagined. Every turn, every step, every quiet hum seemed to draw him deeper into its maze, like a web of threads pulling him to the center. He could no longer pretend that he was merely a visitor here, passing through forgotten halls. The hum had grown too loud, too insistent. He had become part of the citadel, as much as it had become part of him. The girl remained by his side, though her silence had deepened. He had no words to offer her, no explanations to give. She watched him in the way that someone watches a storm, gathering on the horizon quietly with a mix of awe and apprehension. He had never understood why she stayed. She had no reason to. Yet somehow she was always there, as if waiting for something, as if she had known from the beginning that their paths would always lead here to this strange turning point. The questions from the terminal still haunted him. What will you become? And your path is not your own. It was chosen long before you. The words echoed in his mind, but no answers followed. He did not know what he was supposed to become or why the citadel had singled him out. He had only wanted to listen to understand what the hum meant, what it had always meant. But now it seemed listening was no longer enough. The hum had become a force, an undeniable current, pulling him towards something greater, something more than he had ever been prepared for. Days passed, though time in. The citadel had a strange quality. It moved, but it didn't move. It shifted around him like a river, yet he felt no real progression, no real change. He began to notice the small things that had once gone unnoticed, the faint tremor in the air when he passed through certain rooms, the way the walls seemed to pulse when he placed his hand against them. The citadel was alive, alive in ways that no one had ever truly considered. And he, somehow, was its heart. One evening, as the girl sat near him, sketching absent-mindedly, he found himself standing at the edge of the main hall, staring at a vast, hollow space. It had been there all along, but he had never noticed it, not in the way he noticed it now. The floor was cracked, the ceiling high and distant, and the air was heavy with the weight of something unsaid. He felt drawn to it, to the silence that hung in the air like a shroud. Without thinking, he crossed the threshold, his footsteps echoing in the vast emptiness. The girl followed, but she did not speak. She understood, in a way he couldn't explain, that the citadel had led them here for a reason. This place, he realized, was not just a room. It was a doorway. As he stepped further into the space, the hum rose, a low, rumbling sound that seemed to come from deep within the earth itself. It reverberated through his chest, making his heart beat faster. The air thickened, almost as if it were alive, and for the first time he felt the full weight of the citadel's history pressing down on him. He could hear voices distant and faint, like whispers carried through time. They were not speaking to him, they were speaking through him, through the very space he now occupied. He didn't understand it, not completely. But he knew, with an unshakable certainty, that he was no longer just listening. He was becoming part of the hum. The girl's hand brushed his, her touch gentle but firm. In that moment, he realized she had always known this would happen. She had always known that he would be the one to carry the hum forward, to listen, and in the end, to speak for it. He felt a wave of guilt pass through him, not for the path he was about to take, but for the one she was left to walk alone. She had stood by him, not as a passive observer, but as a witness to his growth, his transformation. He turned to her then, ready to speak, but no words came. The hum had silenced him, filling the space between them with something deeper, more profound than language. And so they stood together in that hollow room as the citadel's pulse echoed through the silence. The boy, now no longer just a listener, felt the hum rise within him, ready to lead him forward. He didn't know where it would take him, or what he would become, but he knew, without a doubt, that the journey had already begun. The hum seemed to grow quieter in the space between them, but its presence did not fade. It wrapped around them, both heavy and expectant, as though the citadel itself held its breath. The boy could feel it pressing against his chest, no longer an invitation, but a command. He was no longer just the listener, no longer just the one who tinkered in forgotten corners. The hum had become something larger, an obligation, a force that flowed through him like a current too strong to resist. The girl, standing silently beside him, seemed to sense the shift. Her gaze was steady, unwavering, but there was something in her eyes now, a deep understanding that had not been there before. She had always known more than she let on, knew that the boy's path would eventually collide with something greater. She had seen it in the way he moved, the way he could hear what others could not. And now she was watching him become something else entirely. He turned to her, the weight of his unspoken thoughts pressing on him. For so long, they had been two quiet souls, walking side by side in the vastness of the citadel, but now he felt the distance between them growing, though they stood only inches apart. He wanted to say something, anything that could explain what he was feeling, but the words caught in his throat, tangled in the hum that thrummed louder in his chest. She reached out, her fingers brushing his, and for a moment, the world around them seemed to soften. The citadel, the hum, the weight of the responsibility, it all melted away. In that brief, quiet touch, he felt her understanding, her acceptance, and it was enough. But the hum was still there, still pulling at him, and after a moment, he pulled away gently. He knew what he had to do. It was not a choice, not anymore. It was the only path left to him. Without speaking, he turned and began walking toward the far wall, where a narrow passageway had appeared, as though the citadel had drawn it open just for him. The air shifted, the walls vibrating faintly as the passage beckoned. The girl followed silently, her steps soft but certain behind him. She did not ask where they were going or why. She simply walked beside him, her presence a steady anchor in the growing uncertainty. The passage was narrow, winding, twisting through the bowels of the citadel like a serpent. The walls closed in around them, and the hum grew louder, vibrating through the very stone beneath their feet. It pulsed with a sense of urgency now, no longer the gentle guide it had once been, but something deeper, more demanding. The boy's heart beat in time with the hum, each step bringing him closer to the heart of the citadel, to whatever it was that awaited him in the dark. They walked for what felt like hours, though time seemed to slip away, indistinguishable in the endless corridors. The air grew colder, heavier, as though they were descending into some forgotten ancient place where even the citadel itself had lost its voice. The boy felt a growing sense of inevitability, a pressure building within him as the walls seemed to close tighter around them. And then, just as he thought he could bear it no longer, the passage opened into a vast chamber, so large that it seemed to swallow the light. In the center of the room, an object lay on a pedestal, an orb glowing faintly, its surface shifting as though it were alive. The hum, now deafening, seemed to emanate from the orb, its pulse beating in time with his own. The boy stopped at the edge of the chamber, his breath caught in his throat. He could feel the hum more intensely than ever, as though it was speaking directly to him, urging him forward. He stepped closer, his hands trembling, and reached out, his fingers brushing the surface of the orb. The moment his skin made contact, the hum exploded within him, a wave of energy so powerful that it knocked him backward. His vision blurred, the room spinning around him, and for a moment he thought he might lose himself entirely in the sound. But then slowly the world came back into focus, and he realized that the orb was no longer just an object. It was a part of him, its pulse synchronized with his own. The citadel had chosen him. The hum had led him here, and now it was clear. This was his path, his destiny, not to listen, not to tinker, but to be the conduit for something greater. The hum was not just a sound, it was a force, a living thing that ran through the very fabric of the citadel. And now it had found its voice in him. He turned to the girl, who stood at the edge of the chamber, watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. She didn't need to say anything. He knew she understood. This was the moment they had both been waiting for, the moment when the citadel's secrets were no longer whispers, but truths laid bare for him to embrace. The hum was his now, as much a part of him as the air he breathed. And whatever came next, whatever path he was about to walk, he would not walk it alone. The girl had always been beside him, and now, together, they would face the truth of what the citadel had prepared for them. He took a deep breath, the hum still resonating through his chest, and stepped forward, ready to face whatever came next. The moment his fingers made contact with the orb, everything shifted. The hum, which had always been a constant companion, now surged through him with an intensity he could not comprehend. It was no longer just a sound, it was a force, an energy that seemed to reach into every part of him, expanding and filling every corner of his being. His chest tightened as if the very air around him had thickened, and for an instant he thought he might lose control, as though the hum itself was trying to swallow him whole. But then, just as suddenly, the pressure eased. The hum softened into a steady pulse like the beating of a heart. He stood there, frozen, the orb now glowing in his palm, its light ebbing and flowing with each pulse. He could feel it, like a tether, pulling at something deep within him. The citadel had given him something more than just its secrets. It had given him the key to unlock its heart. The girl stood in the distance, her figure small and distant in the vast chamber, but her eyes were fixed on him. He could feel her watching him, waiting for something, but he couldn't quite understand. What? She had always been by his side, never asking questions, just accepting whatever path he chose to walk. But this was different. The hum was different now, and so was he. He stepped back from the pedestal, feeling a strange weight in his chest. The orb was no longer just an object. It was alive in his hands, its surface shifting and changing like liquid light, as though it was aware of him, of them both. The girl's presence had always been a quiet one, but now it seemed to draw closer, her gaze steady as if she too could feel the change in the air. Without a word, he began to move toward the center of the room, feeling the orb pull him forward. The hum grew louder again, but this time it wasn't just an echo of the citadel. It was something else, something new, as though the entire place had come alive, vibrating in time with his every step. The walls seemed to shimmer around him, and the floor beneath his feet shifted. The room, once cold and empty, now felt alive, as if it were breathing with him. He could see the faintest outline of something. Perhaps it was a doorway, or perhaps it was just his mind playing tricks, but it felt real, like the citadel was showing him a way forward, a way out. The girl's footsteps followed him, quiet but determined. She had not spoken since they entered the chamber, but she had not needed to. He could feel her presence beside him, her understanding, her quiet support. She had always known, more than he had, always seen the things that went unseen. Now, as they moved together, he realized that her silence was not one of uncertainty, but of trust. Trust in him, in the path that was unfolding before them. The closer they got to the shimmering outline in the distance, the more the air seemed to thrum with energy. It was as if the citadel itself was shifting, moving in response to their presence. The hum had become a language now, not one of sound, but of feeling, of emotion. It spoke of purpose, of destiny, of something larger than either of them. The hum was not just a guide. It was a force of change, and it had chosen them both to carry it forward. He reached out, his hand trembling, and touched the outline. It felt cool beneath his fingertips like a sheet of glass, and yet it seemed to pulse with life. The moment his touch made contact, the hum intensified, and the outline before them began to expand, spreading outward like ripples on water. The room around them seemed to dissolve, leaving only the hum, the girl, and the space they were about to enter. Without thinking, without words, they stepped forward together. The space around them seemed to stretch, to bend, and then, as if pulled by the hum itself, the chamber collapsed into light. For a moment, there was nothing. No sound, no shape, no feeling, just pure light, so bright it swallowed everything around them. And then, slowly, it faded, leaving them standing in a new space. It was different here, the air thick with something unfamiliar. The walls, though still made of the same material, felt warmer, softer. He could hear the hum again, but now it was not just inside him. It was everywhere, resonating through the very fabric of this new place. He turned to the girl, her face now illuminated by the strange light surrounding them. This was it. the path they had both been waiting for. The citadel had chosen them, and they were no longer just its listeners, they were its voice, its future. And with that realization, the hum around them seemed to swell, as though the entire universe was waiting for them to speak. The space they had entered felt vast, more so than the citadel's corridors had ever seemed. The walls were no longer defined by stone or metal, but by a shifting, pulsating energy that filled the air, the hum now resonating not just through their bodies, but through the very fabric of this place. The girl stepped forward, her feet barely making a sound, as though she too felt the reverberations that shook the very ground beneath them. She didn't speak, but he could feel her presence more than ever, steady, grounded, and unwavering. The light surrounding them was soft yet intense, casting long shadows that seemed to dance and twist with every movement they made. It was not the harsh light of a sun or the sterile brightness of artificial sources, but something deeper, as if the light itself were an extension of the citadel's pulse, flowing from its core, illuminating the world they now stood in. He looked around, trying to make sense of their new surroundings. It felt like a place outside of time, a space where past, present, and future blended together into a single, infinite moment. The walls were not walls at all, but a fluid, ever-changing material that rippled in response to their movements. He reached out, his fingers grazing the surface, and the wall shifted, expanding outward like a wave breaking across a still sea. The sensation was not like touching stone or metal, but like touching something alive, something that breathed and responded to his touch with a quiet, knowing pulse. He pulled his hand back, uncertain of what he had just experienced. The hum was louder now, almost deafening in its intensity, but it no longer felt foreign. It felt like a part of him, something he had always carried, waiting for this moment to awaken fully. He understood now that the citadel had not only guided him here, but had shaped him for this. He had always been a part of its design, its plan, just as much as the light, the walls, and the hum itself. The girl moved silently beside him, her eyes scanning their surroundings, taking in the space with the same quiet intensity she had always had. She never questioned, never doubted. She simply moved forward, as though she too knew that this was where they were meant to be. It was as if they had both been drawn to this moment, this place, not by accident, but by the quiet pull of something greater. They walked together through the vast expanse, the hum swirling around them, guiding them as much as it echoed in their ears. It was clear now that the path they were on was no longer one of exploration, it was one of creation. They were not just wandering through the citadel, they were becoming its architects, its new breath, its future. The weight of this realization settled over him like a cloak, both comforting and overwhelming. And then, as they rounded a curve in the shifting landscape, he saw it, an enormous structure in the distance, its form barely visible in the shimmering light. It was not a building, not an artifact, but something else entirely. It seemed to stretch upward toward the very edges of the space, its shape constantly changing, morphing before his eyes, as though it were being formed right before them. It was as if the citadel itself had been waiting for them to arrive so that it could take its final form. They moved toward it, the hum growing louder with each step, its rhythm matching the quickening beat of his heart. There was no fear now, only an undeniable sense of purpose, of knowing that this was the moment everything had been leading to. He reached out again, his fingers brushing the air, and the shape in front of him solidified, becoming more tangible, more real. He could feel it, The citadel, the energy, the hum, responding to his touch, acknowledging his presence. The girl stood beside him, her expression serene, as if she had always known this moment would come. He turned to her, finally breaking the silence, his voice barely a whisper, yet it felt louder than the hum itself. "Do you feel it?" he asked, the weight of his words hanging in the air. She nodded, her eyes soft but knowing. It was always meant to be like this. With that, they stepped forward together, moving toward the heart of the citadel's living core. The structure before them seemed to pulse with life, its form shifting in a dance of light and energy, its purpose now clear. It was not just a creation. It was a bridge, a passage between worlds, and they were the ones chosen to walk across it. The hum surrounded them, enveloping them in its warmth and its power. The citadel had brought them here for a reason, and as they stepped forward, they knew, without doubt, that they were the ones to carry its legacy into the future. Together they were not just witnesses to the citadel's secrets. They were its keepers, its new beginning. And whatever came next, they would face it, side by side, as part of the same rhythm, the same pulse that had brought them here. The air around them felt different now, heavier with purpose, but also more fluid, like it was waiting for them to shape it. Every step they took felt both grounded and infinite, as if the ground beneath their feet was both firm and elastic, stretching with each movement. The citadel, once a place of echoes and quiet hums, was now a living organism, responsive to their presence, its walls pulsating in rhythm with the energy between them. They reached the center of the shifting structure, and he could feel the hum vibrate through him, louder now, closer, as if it was speaking directly to his soul. The orb he had touched earlier, still in his hand, seemed to resonate with the space around them. It was no longer just an object. It had become part of him, a conduit for the citadel's energy, for its pulse. The citadel was speaking through him now, guiding him toward the final part of its story. He stopped, feeling the energy swell, and turned to the girl. Her eyes were fixed on him, as calm as ever, but there was something else in them now. A recognition, an understanding that she too felt the weight of what was happening. They had come this far together, but now, more than ever, he could feel the inevitable separation of their paths, one that was not born from distance, but from the choices they would have to make, the roles they would assume. Her hand brushed his, and in that fleeting touch, they both understood. This moment, this space, was not just a destination, it was a transformation. The citadel had led them here for a reason. They were no longer simply part of the hum, they had become its keepers, its stewards, its architects. But the final choice, the final step, was theirs alone to take. As he stood there, in the very heart of the citadel, the walls around them seemed to breathe, the air thick with the weight of unspoken truths. The hum had reached its peak, and now it was waiting, as if holding its breath for them to speak, to act. He closed his eyes, feeling the pulse of the citadel, of the energy flowing through his body, and realized that there was no more room for hesitation. The citadel's future, its legacy, was now in his hands. He stepped forward toward the center of the shifting structure, and felt the hum intensify, wrapping around him like a wave. The orb pulsed in his hand, and for a brief moment, it felt like the entire citadel was holding its breath, waiting for him to make the final move. The girl stood behind him, her presence a steady anchor, but he knew that this moment, this choice, was his alone. The walls around him rippled, and the light shifted, casting long shadows across the space. He could feel the citadel's power, building, its energy swirling around him. The air seemed to tremble with anticipation. And then, as if in response to his decision, the orb in his hand flared, a burst of light cascading outward in every direction. For a moment, everything was white, blinding in its brilliance. When the light faded, he opened his eyes and saw the citadel differently. The energy was still there, still pulsing, but it was no longer just a hum. It was a song, a quiet melody that filled every corner of the space, its notes resonating in his chest, in his soul. The citadel had awakened fully now, and its purpose was clear. They had not just come to witness its legacy, they had come to carry it forward, to be the keepers of its future. He turned to the girl who stood beside him, her eyes wide with understanding. In that moment, they both knew that their journey was far from over. The citadel had chosen them, not to simply watch its story unfold, but to become part of it, to shape it, to lead it into a new era. The hum had not been a burden or a force. It had been a guide, a whisper that had led them here. And now, as they stood together in the heart of the citadel, they understood that they were not the end of its story. They were its beginning, the next chapter in a tale that had been written long before they had arrived. The girl reached out and took his hand, and in that simple gesture, the citadel's pulse seemed to slow, as if acknowledging their connection, their shared destiny. Together they would carry the citadel's legacy forward, and whatever came next, they would face it as one. The air felt lighter now, as if the weight of the citadel's secrets had been lifted, or at least shared between them. The hum still reverberated softly, now more of a steady heartbeat than a deafening roar. It surrounded them, guiding them, but no longer demanding. The walls seemed to stretch, to breathe, no longer rigid, but fluid, shifting in time with the new rhythm that had begun to pulse within the very core of the citadel. He stood there, the orb still in his hand, its glow dimming, but its presence still unmistakable. The energy within him had changed, transformed into something more. It was as if he had merged with the citadel itself, a part of its vast, unspoken power. He could feel its history, its stories, and its legacy flowing through him, not as a burden, but as something to be cherished, something to be carried forward. Beside him? The girl moved, her steps as silent as always, but now her gaze held a deeper understanding, a knowing that he couldn't quite place. She had been with him through every moment, every shift in the hum, and now, as they stood together at the heart of the citadel, he realized that their bond was stronger than he had ever imagined. She wasn't just a companion, she was a part of him, as much a keeper of the citadel's future as he was. They had both been chosen, not by fate, but by something deeper, something eternal. The room around them had changed too. The walls, once shifting and unclear, had taken on a new shape. The ethereal quality that had filled the air now seemed to settle, becoming more tangible, more solid. It was as though the citadel was coming into focus, revealing its true nature to them both. The hum, once so overwhelming, was now a steady presence, a guide rather than a force. They had become part of its rhythm, its story, its future. They moved together through the space, not knowing exactly where they were going, but trusting in the hum to guide them. The citadel was no longer just a place. It was a journey, a path, that they had stepped onto without fully understanding where it would lead. But that no longer mattered. They were no longer simply following the hum. They were shaping it, and with each step they were writing the next chapter in the Citadel's long and unspoken story. As they moved deeper into the shifting landscape, the light around them shifted too. It was no longer the cold, stark light they had first encountered. It had softened, becoming warmer, richer, as though the citadel itself was alive with possibility. The walls, now more stable, began to glow softly, casting shadows that seemed to move with them, like memories that hadn't yet been told. The girl stopped for a moment, her gaze fixed on something in the distance. He followed her eyes, but he saw nothing but the endless shifting of light and shadow. Yet, he understood, there was something ahead, something that was waiting for them, something that the citadel had been preparing them for. He could feel it. Now a pull in his chest, stronger than anything the hum had ever been. Without a word, they continued, walking through the space as if it were their own, their footsteps steady and sure. The path ahead was uncertain, but it didn't matter. They had become part of the citadel's song, part of its future. The path was no longer something to be discovered, it was something to be created. And as they walked, the citadel responded to them. The hum, once a distant sound, now filled the air with warmth, guiding them forward, urging them on. The walls seemed to close in, not in confinement, but in embrace, wrapping them in the energy that had been waiting for them all along. They were no longer just observers, no longer just listeners. They had become the citadel's story, its past and future intertwined in a single, unbreakable bond. The citadel had chosen them, not for what they could do, but for who they were. And now, as they moved through its heart, they understood that they were not just part of its legacy. They were its new beginning. The girl's hand brushed his once more, a silent affirmation, a promise that they were in this together, whatever came next. And as the citadel's hum grew louder, filling the space with its ancient song, they both knew that they were ready. Ready to shape what came next. Ready to carry the citadel's story forward. The citadel had become a part of them, its hum now entwined with their very breath. Every step they took felt like it resonated through the space, not just as their movement, but as a pulse that matched the rhythm of the citadel itself. They had become the conduits, the heartbeat, and as they moved through the chambers, the walls shifted with them, as if acknowledging their every thought. It was no longer just a structure, it was alive, and they were part of its living, breathing essence. The girl's presence beside him was the one constant in this sea of change. Her calmness was a steady anchor, yet he could sense the quiet shift within her too, as if the citadel had touched something deep inside her as well. She had always been the observer, the quiet witness, but now it felt as if she too had become part of the hum. They had both been chosen for something beyond their understanding, and now, together, they were moving toward something unknown, something that awaited them at the core of this living world. The landscape around them was constantly shifting, no longer static, but fluid, like a dream they could shape. The light seemed to shift with them, no longer casting shadows but illuminating their path, guiding them deeper into the citadel. It was as if the citadel had recognized their presence, had understood their role in its future, and now it was offering them its trust, its guidance, its energy. He paused for a moment, feeling the weight of everything that had led to this point, his journey, her quiet presence, the hum that had guided him from the very beginning. It had started as a soft whisper, a call he couldn't ignore, and now it had become his voice, their voice. He understood now that they were not meant to simply listen to the citadel's story. They were meant to tell it, to shape it, to carry it forward. Without speaking, he turned to her. There was no need for words. They both knew what had to be done. The citadel was not a place for passive observation. It was a living entity, and they were its new stewards. The path they had walked, the hum they had embraced, had prepared them for this final moment. They had been chosen not because they were special or powerful, but because they were willing to listen, to understand, and to carry what had been entrusted to them. Together they moved forward, their footsteps in sync as they walked deeper into the heart of the citadel. The space before them stretched infinitely, but this time it wasn't overwhelming. It felt like a canvas, ready to be filled, ready to be shaped. The citadel had been a place of secrets, of ancient knowledge, but now it was ready to move into the future, to become something new. They reached the center where the energy seemed to concentrate, gathering in the air around them, buzzing with anticipation. The hum had become louder, but it wasn't a sound anymore. It was a presence, a weight in the air that they could feel through their very bones. The orb, still glowing in his hand, pulsed with the same energy that filled the space around them. It was clear now. This was the moment when the citadel would become what it was always meant to be. He stepped forward, the girl beside him, her hand still gently brushing his, and as they reached the heart of the citadel, the orb in his hand flared to life. The energy swirled around them, lifting them up, surrounding them, and for a brief moment he could see the citadel in its entirety, its past, its present, and its future, all unfolding before him in a single, brilliant instant. It was all connected, all one. And he understood then that he and the girl were not separate from it. They were the continuation, the future. As the light grew brighter, the hum intensified, not deafening, but comforting, like a promise. He could feel it deep in his chest, as though the citadel was breathing through him. The energy inside him, inside them both, was no longer just a guide. It was a force that they now carried. Together, they had become part of its eternal cycle, and, as the light began to fade, they stood at the center of the citadel, no longer just its keepers, but its creators. The world before them stretched out, full of endless possibility. The hum still thrummed through the air, but now it was their song. They had become the new heartbeat of the citadel, the new voice that would carry its legacy forward. Whatever came next, they would face it together as part of this living, breathing world, shaping it, guiding it, forever connected to the hum that had brought them here. The citadel had not only chosen them, it had made them part of its story, its future, and now, together, they would write the next chapter. The hum, once a distant echo in the chambers, had now grown into a steady, constant pulse that seemed to reverberate through every fiber of his being. It no longer felt like a force pushing from the outside, but like an energy that had always been there, waiting for him to embrace it fully. The citadel was no longer just a structure of walls and halls. It had become a part of them, living and breathing with them. The air itself seemed to hum with potential, as if the very space they occupied was waiting for them to shape it. He felt the orb in his hand pulse gently, its glow steady but not blinding. It was no longer simply an object of power, but a conduit, a reflection of their connection to the citadel. As he turned to the girl, her steady gaze met his, and for the first time he realized they were not just walking side by side. They had become one with the citadel, and the bond they shared was inseparable, unspoken, yet understood. She reached out, her fingers brushing the edge of his arm, a silent confirmation of the unspoken truth between them. There was no fear now, no hesitation. The path ahead was still unclear, but it no longer mattered. Together, they had become the future of the citadel, the stewards of its legacy, and whatever came next, they would face it as one. The walls around them continued to shift, but now it felt less like the citadel was changing and more like they were simply witnessing its transformation. The structure, once solid and unyielding, had taken on a fluid, organic quality, as though it were responding to the energy that flowed through them. The light in the chamber seemed to pulse with life, a soft glow that illuminated everything. Around them, casting no shadows but rather bathing them in warmth, the hum deepened, its resonance vibrating through the very air, filling every corner of the citadel. The space had grown larger, more expansive, as if the citadel itself was opening up to them, revealing its true nature. It was no longer just a place of secrets and hidden knowledge. It was a living entity, and they were its voice. They moved forward, the orb still glowing softly in his hand, its pulse steady and sure. Every step felt like a new beginning, the ground beneath their feet solid yet malleable, like they were walking on a canvas that was still being painted. The citadel, once a silent witness to time, had now become an active participant in their journey, a collaborator in the creation of something new. They walked together not just as companions, but as co-creators of the citadel's next chapter. The walls, once distant and impassable, now seemed to bend and shift in response to their presence. The air hummed with a quiet anticipation, as though everything around them was waiting for them to make the next move, to give it form and purpose. And then they reached the center of the space, the heart of the citadel. The orb in his hand pulsed more brightly now, its light filling the entire chamber, casting long, rippling shadows on the walls. It was not just light, it was energy, pure and raw, flowing through them, connecting them to the very essence of the citadel. The space around them seemed to expand, not in size but in potential, like they were standing at the edge of a vast, uncharted world, waiting to be explored. He stood there for a moment, letting the energy wash over him, feeling it, seep into every part of him, every corner of his mind. The hum was no longer just a sound, but a presence, a force that guided them forward, pushing them to create, to build, to shape the future. He turned to the girl, and for the first time, words seemed unnecessary. She understood, as she always had, that they were not just shaping the citadel. They were shaping the future of everything it had ever known. The weight of that realization settled over him, and yet it didn't feel like a burden. It felt like an invitation, an opportunity to create something new, something that would endure beyond them. They stepped forward together, their hands brushing once more, the orb glowing brighter with each step. The citadel, in all its vastness and complexity, was no longer a mystery to them. It was their canvas, their creation, and they were ready to begin the work that would carry its legacy forward. As they moved, the hum grew louder, more resonant, filling the space with its energy. The walls around them continued to shift, becoming more solid, more defined, but still responsive, still alive. The citadel was no longer just a place, it was a living entity, a part of them, and they were its creators. And with that realization, the energy in the air seemed to solidify, becoming something tangible, something real. The citadel had been waiting for them to take this step, to make this choice, and now that they had, Everything had fallen into place. They were not just the stewards of the citadel, they were its new beginning. The future, once a distant unknown, was now in their hands, and whatever came next, they would face it as one, bound together by the hum, by the citadel, and by the shared understanding that they were no longer just walking through its halls. They were its heart, its voice, and its future. The citadel's pulse grew stronger as they continued forward, the energy between them and the structure itself becoming almost tangible. Every step seemed to echo through the chambers, not just in the space around them, but deep within their hearts. It was as though the citadel was no longer just a building, but an extension of their own beings, its hum now fully in sync with the rhythm of their thoughts, their movements, and the air they breathed. The girl, walking beside him, moved with the same quiet grace she had always had. Yet now there was a subtle change in her, an awareness, a knowing, as if the very act of being here had unlocked something deep within her as well. Her eyes, though calm, held an intensity now, reflecting the magnitude of what they were experiencing together. He could feel her thoughts swirling, a silent current that ran parallel to his own, and for the first time it didn't feel like she was just following him. She was as much a part of the citadel's story as he was. The walls around them began to shift again, more noticeably now, as if responding to their presence. The once steady pulse of light had taken on a new quality, less aglow and more like a living thing, stretching and contracting as though the space itself were breathing. He reached out instinctively, his fingers grazing the shifting surface, and felt the warmth that radiated from it. It was soft, alive with energy, and it responded to him as if it recognized him, as though it were inviting him to become part of it, to shape it. He turned to the girl, her gaze already meeting his. Without speaking, they both knew what needed to be done. This place, this citadel, was not just a relic of the past. It was a living entity, capable of growth, capable of change, and they were its stewards, its future. It had led them here, had shaped them both in ways neither of them could have fully understood until now. He stepped forward, feeling the hum grow louder, the air thickening with its energy, and the walls around them seemed to draw closer, as though wrapping them in the very essence of the citadel. The space they had entered was no longer a room. It had become something fluid, something that pulsed with the same rhythm as their hearts. The hum, once just a sound, was now more of a feeling, a deep connection that flowed through every inch of the citadel, and it was now their turn to shape it. The orb in his hand flickered again, its light expanding outward, reaching across the room, connecting with the very walls, the very pulse of the citadel. He felt its power surge through him, and with it, the unmistakable sensation that they were no longer just participants. They were the architects of this place, the ones who would decide how it would grow, how it would evolve. The weight of that realization settled on him, but it wasn't a burden. It was a responsibility, yes, but one that filled him with a sense of purpose, of belonging. He looked back at the girl, her expression unreadable, but there was a calm certainty in her eyes. She had always been the quiet observer, the one who saw what others missed, and now, as they stood at the center of the citadel, it was clear that she, too, had always known what was coming. She wasn't just by his side, she was as much a part of this moment as he was, a part of the citadel's future. Together they stood there, at the heart of the citadel, the orb pulsing in his hand, the hum reverberating through them. The space around them seemed to open, as if the citadel itself was offering them the freedom to shape it, to decide what would come next. And they were ready. Whatever had brought them here, whatever had shaped their path, was now clear. They were not just stewards of the citadel's legacy, they were its creators, its future. The girl stepped closer, her hand brushing his once more, and in that simple touch, they both understood. They were not alone in this. Together they had the power to shape this place, to take the energy they had been given and mold it into something new. Something that would last. Something that would endure. As they stood there, the walls of the citadel seemed to shift again, responding to their presence, to the quiet power they had unlocked. The light around them grew brighter, not blinding, but illuminating, filling the space with a warmth that felt like the beginning of something vast, something eternal. The citadel had been waiting for this moment, waiting for them to take their place in its story. They stepped forward together, and as they did, the citadel seemed to breathe with them, its pulse now in sync with their every movement. The future was open to them, a canvas waiting to be painted, and they were the ones who would shape it. Whatever lay ahead, they knew one thing for certain. They were no longer just part of the citadel's legacy. They were its new beginning. The light around them had shifted once more, now a soft, constant glow that seemed to emanate from the very walls themselves. It was not a harsh light, not one that blinded or overwhelmed, but one that wrapped around them gently, illuminating the path ahead. The citadel, once a place of secrets and uncertainty, now felt like a living entity, one that was breathing alongside them, its rhythm aligned with their own. Every step they took seemed to stir the air, and with each movement, the hum, though still present, had softened into a steady, guiding presence. As they moved further into the citadel's heart, the space around them seemed to expand, opening up in ways that defied reason. It was as if the very fabric of the place was unfolding before them, revealing itself in ways it had never done before. The walls, once rigid and unyielding, now flowed and shifted, bending in response to their presence. The ground beneath their feet felt solid, yet there was an unmistakable sense of fluidity, like they were walking through the folds of time itself. The orb still pulsed in his hand, its glow steady and constant, and he could feel its power coursing through him, intertwining with his own heartbeat. It had become more than just an object. It was a part of him, and he could feel its connection to the citadel deepening with every passing moment. It was no longer just a conduit for power. It was a link to everything that had come before, everything that had shaped this place, and everything that was yet to come. The girl walked beside him, her presence as steady as ever. Yet now there was an unspoken understanding between them that went beyond words. She had always been the one who observed, who took in the details others missed. But now, as they moved forward, he could sense that she too had changed. She was not simply following anymore. She was part of this, part of the story, and she understood as he did now that the path ahead was theirs to create, not to follow. They moved through the ever-shifting corridors, the citadel unfolding around. Them, like a living, breathing entity, its pulse now a part of them, guiding them forward. The hum, once a distant background noise, had become a constant presence, like a heartbeat that resonated through the very air. With every step, they were no longer just witnesses to the citadel's transformation. They were its architects, its future. Ahead, in the distance, he saw a doorway. a doorway that seemed to materialize out of thin air, its edges glowing softly like the first light of dawn. It beckoned to them, a promise of something greater, something just beyond their reach. The girl, sensing his gaze, turned to look at him, and in that brief moment he saw the same understanding in her eyes. They had reached the heart of the citadel, and now it was time to make their final choice. They stepped toward the doorway together, the space around them stretching, welcoming them into its embrace. The moment they crossed the threshold, the air seemed to shift again, and for the briefest of moments, everything went still. The hum faded into silence, and in that silence they could hear their own breathing, steady and calm. But the stillness did not last long. It was soon replaced by a surge of energy, a surge that felt like a tidal wave crashing over them. The walls around them, now seemingly alive, pulsed with an intensity they could feel deep in their bones. The citadel had come alive with them, responding to their presence, to their choices. It was no longer a passive entity, waiting for them to discover its secrets. It was a living, breathing force, capable of change, capable of growth, and now they were at the center of it all. They had become not just part of its legacy, but its future. The girl's hand brushed his once more, a silent reassurance, and for the first time he understood that this journey, this path they had taken, had never been about finding answers. It had always been about creation, about shaping what came next. Together they had unlocked the citadel's true potential, and now it was up to them to decide what it would become. With one final step, they crossed the threshold completely, and the world around them shifted once more. But this time, it wasn't just the citadel that had changed, it was them. They were no longer simply walking through its halls. They were part of it, its new heartbeat, its new voice. And whatever came next, they would face it together as the architects of a new future. The threshold they crossed felt like more than just a physical space. It was as if they had stepped into a moment that could not be undone, a place where time itself seemed to bend and stretch, as though the citadel's very fabric had rippled with their arrival. The pulse that had guided them, that had been their constant companion, now resonated deeper within them. It no longer felt external, a force pushing from outside. Instead, it was a part of their very beings, woven into their bones, their hearts, their breath. He could feel it in every part of him, the hum, now no longer just a sound but a presence that filled the air around them. It was as though the citadel had opened itself to them, no longer a place of secrets and riddles, but a living, breathing entity waiting to be shaped. The walls around them, which had once seemed so rigid, now seemed to shift and flow, as if responding to their every movement, their every thought. They were not merely walking through a place anymore, they were walking through the citadel's heart, its essence, its pulse. The girl moved beside him, her silence as deep as the hum itself. Yet there was no hesitation in her now. She no longer seemed like a quiet observer. She had become a part of this just as much as he had. Her presence beside him was as steady and sure as the citadel's own rhythm, and he understood more clearly than ever that they were not alone in this journey. The citadel had chosen them both, and they had become the stewards of its new future, its new beginning. They continued forward, drawn by an invisible force, toward the heart of the space before them. The citadel stretched endlessly around them, its boundaries no longer clear, as if it was unfolding in real time, growing with every step they took. The floor beneath them felt solid, but the walls seemed to bend in and out of focus, as if they were living things, pulsing in time with the hum that resonated in the air. And then ahead of them, something began to take shape, a presence, vast and powerful, glowing with an intensity that felt both familiar and alien. It wasn't just a structure or a monument. It was something alive, something that seemed to contain all the potential of the citadel itself, waiting for them to understand it, to unlock its true form. The light that radiated from it was soft, but it was filled with power, a power that hummed in tune with their own heartbeat. He reached out, his hand trembling slightly, not with fear, but with the weight of the choice before him. They had come this far, the citadel had led them here, and now they had the power to shape its future. There were no more answers waiting for them, only the chance to create, to decide what this place would become. The girl stepped forward, her gaze never leaving him. He could see the understanding in her eyes, the recognition of what they had become together. They were not merely witnesses to this transformation, they were its architects. Whatever the citadel would be in the future, they would decide it. The hum had brought them here, but now it was up to them to listen, to create, and to lead. The moment they touched the light, the air around them seemed to still. The hum faded into a silence so deep it felt as though the citadel itself was holding its breath. In that silence, the presence before them seemed to expand, growing not outward, but inward, filling every corner of their minds, their souls. They were not simply standing before something powerful. They were becoming a part of it, melding with it, connecting with its very essence. And then the silence broke, not with a sound, but with a shift, something deep, fundamental, and undeniable. The citadel had unlocked its heart, and in doing so, it had unlocked theirs. They were no longer merely part of its legacy. They had become its future, its creators, its stewards. The very walls around them seemed to bend and stretch in response, not out of necessity, but out of choice. The citadel was no longer a place of quiet echoes. It was a place of creation, and they had the power to shape it. With that realization, the space around them began to shift once more, but this time it was not just the citadel responding. It was them, both of them, the hum within them shaping the world around them. The walls stretched, the light pulsed, and they were no longer just walking through the citadel, they were walking through its future. Together, they would shape it. Together, they would carry its legacy forward. And as they stood there, at the heart of the citadel, the future felt open, vast, and infinite, waiting for them to define it. The hum had been their guide, but now they were the ones who would lead it. Whatever came next, they would face it together as the creators of a new world, a new beginning. And the citadel, for the first time, felt alive, not just as a place, but as a living testament to the journey they had taken. The future was now in their hands. The light that enveloped them now was no longer soft, but sharp with clarity, vibrant in its promise. It hummed with the same intensity that had guided them, and for a moment it felt as though the very air around them was filled with 1,000,000 unspoken possibilities. The citadel had become more than just a space. It was a living, breathing entity, pulsing with a power that was not just of creation, but of transformation. They were standing at the precipice of something that neither of them could fully understand, but both of them could feel. The girl beside him remained as still as she had always been, her calm presence, a steadying force in the midst of the energy swirling around them. Her gaze, though quiet, seemed to hold the weight of everything they had done and everything that was yet to come. She had always been the observer, the one who saw what others could not. And now, as they stood together, he realized that she was as much a part of this journey as he was. Without her unwavering presence, none of this would have been possible. The citadel, once a place of unknowns, had now become their canvas, ready to be shaped and molded by their hands. They had crossed every threshold, navigated every hall, unlocked every secret. And now, as the light pulsed and the hum deepened, they knew they were no longer just witnesses to history. They were part of it, its creators, its stewards, its future. The orb in his hand pulsed again, this time with a strength that made his entire arm tremble. It was as if the energy within it was calling to him, urging him forward. He reached out, instinctively placing it gently in the center of the shifting space before them. And as soon as it made contact with the ground, the entire room seemed to react. The walls, the light, the very air itself shifted as though they had unlocked the next phase of the citadel's existence. For the first time, the citadel was not just reacting to them, it was responding. The walls began to glow with a golden light, intricate patterns weaving through the surface like veins of energy. The hum, once a steady pulse, now grew louder, its rhythm changing, expanding, as if it were being woven into something grander. It was no longer a guiding force, it was a part of them, as they were a part of it. He turned to the girl, his breath caught in his chest. There was no need for words. The moment had arrived. This was what they had been preparing for. Together, they had unlocked the heart of the citadel, and now they were its creators. The hum was no longer something to follow. It was something to shape, to lead. The space around them continued to change, the light now brighter, more vibrant, as if it were alive. And in that moment he felt something deeper, something beyond the energy around them. It was the citadel's heartbeat, slow and steady, but pulsing with life and possibility. It was the rhythm of their own hearts, intertwined with it, beating as one. They stood in the center of it all, feeling the weight of the moment settle around them. There was no going back now. The citadel had chosen them, not as its saviors, not as its stewards, but as its creators, the ones who would shape its future, who would guide its energy forward into the unknown. It was a weight, yes, but it was also a gift that had been passed down through generations, waiting for the right moment, for the right hands to shape it. The girl stepped forward, her hand reaching out to meet his. They clasped each other's hands, not as a promise of unity, but as a shared understanding of what lay ahead. Together they had unlocked the citadel's potential, and now they would walk forward as its keepers, its creators. The future was no longer a distant unknown, it was theirs to define. The hum, now steady and sure, filled the space around them. The light continued to pulse, not just in the walls, but in the very air, like the heartbeat of a living world. And, in that moment, he understood. This was not an ending, nor was it a beginning. It was both. The citadel had always been, and always would be, but now it was theirs to shape. And as they stood together, hands intertwined, they knew that whatever came next, they would face it as one, bound by the hum, by the citadel, and by the promise of what they would create together. The energy that surrounded them was no longer a foreign thing. It was part of them, intertwined with their very essence. It flowed through them, filling every gap and pushing them towards something bigger, something more profound than they had ever imagined. The citadel had been many things, silent, vast, mysterious. But now it was alive, and they were at its core, the architects of its new existence, The walls that once stretched on endlessly now seemed to breathe with them, pulsing gently in time with their own heartbeats. The light had shifted, no longer cold and distant, but warm, inviting. It enveloped them like a second skin, wrapping them in the citadel's embrace. It was as if the very space had transformed, not simply in appearance but in purpose, as though it had been waiting for them, for this moment, for the final step to become not just a place but a living testament to what they had unlocked together. They moved forward, though there was no real path to follow. Every step they took felt like a new beginning, as if they were writing the first lines of a new chapter, a chapter that would carry them and the citadel into the future. The light ahead of them, once distant, now seemed to draw nearer, pulsing with the same rhythm that filled their chests. They were no longer simply standing in the citadel. They were part of its very fabric, and the hum that had once guided them now felt like their own pulse, their own breath. With each movement, "Biush," Citadel responded, its energy bending and flowing in sync with them. It was not passive anymore. It was alive, growing with them, expanding in ways they hadn't yet fully understood. The space around them shifted, revealing new paths, new possibilities, and with every step they felt the weight of their creation settling around them. But there was a part of him, buried deep within, that felt an undeniable pull, an understanding that they had come to the crossroads. The citadel had opened itself to them, had shown them the way, but now the future was something they had to shape on their own. It wasn't just about the hum or the light. It was about what they would do with it, how they would guide it, how they would carry the legacy of the citadel forward into the world that awaited beyond. The girl, walking beside him, did not falter, did not hesitate. She was as much a part of this as he was, but there was an awareness in her eyes now that had not been there before. She was no longer just a companion on this journey. She had become an extension of the citadel itself, just as he had. Together they had unlocked something, but now it was their turn to decide what it would become. The citadel had given them the tools, the power, the energy, but it was up to them to build, and that, he realized, was the key. The citadel was not a passive entity. It had always been alive, waiting for the right hands to shape it. They were those hands. It was not a place to simply be observed or revered. It was a place to be molded, to be guided into something greater. The walls around them seemed to soften, the light shifting in response to their thoughts, their movements. There was no longer a sense of separation between them and the citadel. It had become part of them, just as they had become part of it. The hum that filled the air now was not just the hum of energy, it was the hum of creation, of possibility, of the future. He stepped forward, and the space around them seemed to respond, the walls bending gently in his direction, the air around him thickening with possibility. The girl followed without hesitation, her presence a constant, a reminder that they were not alone in this. Together they had come this far, and together they would carry it forward. The citadel had no boundaries now. It was not just a place. It was an idea, an energy, a force, and it was waiting for them to shape it into something new. Something that would live beyond them, beyond their time. He looked at the girl, her face calm and focused, her eyes reflecting the same understanding that had been growing in him. They didn't need to speak. They both understood that this was their moment, their chance to define not only the citadel's future, but their own. The weight of it pressed down on him, not with fear, but with excitement, with anticipation. The future was open to them, and the choices they made now would shape it in ways they couldn't yet imagine. And so they stood together in the heart of the citadel, the hum around them now a soft, steady rhythm, no longer overwhelming, but filling the space with a sense of quiet certainty. They had become part of the citadel, just as it had become part of them. The future was theirs to create, and together they would guide it, shaping the hum into something that would echo through the ages. The citadel, once so vast and unknown, now felt like an extension of their own minds. Every corner, every shift in the air seemed to respond to them, a reflection of their thoughts, their intentions. The hum that had once seemed so distant, so foreign, was now intertwined with their every movement, every breath. It was as if they had become its heart, its rhythm, and it had become theirs in return. They moved together through the shifting landscape, no longer just explorers but creators, sculpting the space around them with each step. The walls bent and pulsed in sync with them, as though the citadel was listening, responding, becoming what they needed it to be. The world around them was alive, and they were its architects. The girl walked beside him, her presence as steady as ever, but there was a change in the way she moved now. She no longer seemed like a quiet observer, as she once had. Now she was a part of this transformation, just as much a creator of the citadel's future as he was. The energy between them had shifted, becoming something deeper, something more intertwined. They were no longer two separate beings. Together, they were the embodiment of the citadel's new purpose. The hum had become something more than just sound. It was a force, a living presence that swirled around them, filling the space with its energy. It no longer felt like a guiding whisper in the background. It was now the heartbeat of the citadel, the pulse of the future that they were creating together. Every step they took seemed to make the citadel come more alive, more real, as if their intentions were shaping the very structure of this place, molding it into something that had never existed before. He could feel it in the air, the power, the responsibility, but it was no longer overwhelming. It was liberating, as though they had unlocked a potential within themselves and within the citadel that they had never known existed. The citadel had been waiting for them, just as they had been waiting for it. Together they had unlocked something that had been hidden for eons, and now it was theirs to shape. Ahead, the light shifted, soft and golden, bathing them in its glow. The space around them stretched, becoming even more fluid, more expansive, as if the very boundaries of the citadel were no longer fixed, but malleable, waiting to be defined. The orb, still pulsing with the energy of the citadel, hung in the air between them, its light flickering in time with their hearts. It had become a symbol, not just of the citadel's power, but of their own, of the role they now played in its future. He turned to the girl, and for a moment there was silence between them, a quiet understanding that needed no words. The king had come so far, and now they were standing on the precipice of something monumental. The citadel had given them everything, but it was up to them to decide what it would become. They were no longer passive observers in this world. They were the ones who would define its future. She looked at him then, and in her eyes he saw the same realization. They were no longer just part of this place, they were its creators, its future. The hum that filled the air wasn't just the citadel's, it was theirs too. It was a connection that ran deeper than anything they had known, a bond that would carry them forward, together. The girl reached out, her hand brushing his once more, and in that simple gesture, the energy between them seemed to surge. It wasn't just a physical touch, it was a joining, a merging of purpose, of intent, Together they would shape this world. Together they would carry it into the future. With that understanding, they stepped forward once more, the citadel shifting around them in response, its pulse in time with theirs. The future stretched out before them, open and vast, but it was no longer something unknown. It was theirs to create. The walls, the light, the very air around them had become their canvas, and they were the ones who would paint it with their vision. And so, as they moved deeper into the heart of the citadel, the energy around them seemed to swell, filling the space with the promise of what was to come. They had unlocked the citadel's potential, and now it was up to them to shape it, to guide it, to build a future that would echo through time. The hum, no longer distant or separate, now thrummed with their every step. It was their future, their creation, and together they would carry it forward, shaping the world around them with every thought, every breath. The world around them continued to shift and respond to their presence, as though every movement, every decision was part of the citadel's unfolding story. They were no longer just walking through a space. They were living within it, breathing with it, their every thought, shaping the air, the walls, the very fabric of the world around them. It was a power that felt both exhilarating and terrifying in its potential, a gift and a responsibility intertwined. The girl walked beside him, her presence as steady as it had always been, but now there was a subtle shift in the way she carried herself. She seemed more attuned to the citadel than ever before, her steps flowing with the rhythm of the hum that surrounded them. He could feel the connection between them, between the two of them, and the citadel, deepening with every passing moment. They were no longer just part of the citadel's story, they were writing it, crafting it, defining its future with every decision, every breath. They reached the center of the citadel, where the energy felt the most intense, as if it were gathering all around them. The walls seemed to pulse in time with their hearts, the hum vibrating in the air like a living thing. He felt it within himself, the weight of the power they had unlocked, the responsibility they now carried. The citadel had given them everything, but now it was up to them to decide what would come next. They were not just stewards of the citadel's future, they were its creators, its architects. He stood still for a moment, feeling the weight of the moment settle on him. The girl, too, paused beside him, her gaze steady, her presence unwavering. They both knew what was at stake, what they had unlocked, and what lay ahead. The future of the citadel, and perhaps of everything that lay beyond it, was now in their hands. It was a future they had to shape together, and together they would decide what it would become. He turned to her, and in that moment there was no need for words. They both understood that this was their moment, their chance to leave their mark, to create something that would endure long after they were gone. They had unlocked the citadel's potential, but now they would mold it, shape it into something new. A future built on the hum that had guided them here, a future where they were no longer just following. It was their turn to lead. The girl's hand brushed his, and with that simple touch, they both felt the hum grow stronger, its presence enveloping them, guiding them. It wasn't just a sound now. It was a force, a living energy that connected them to everything around them. The walls, the light, the very air. They were all part of this now, part of the story they were about to tell. The citadel had waited for them to unlock its potential, but now it was up to them to decide how it would unfold. Together, they took a step forward, the energy around them swirling, responding to their movement, to their intentions. The hum seemed to echo through the very core of the citadel, reverberating in time with their heart. And as they walked, the walls seemed to stretch and bend, the light growing brighter, more vibrant, as if the citadel itself was awakening to its new future. He could feel it now, the power, the responsibility. The citadel was not just a place, it was a living, breathing entity, and they were its future, its creators. The hum, once distant and guiding, was now a part of them, intertwined with their every step, every thought. Together they would shape what came next. And in that moment, as they stood at the heart of the citadel, the future seemed both limitless and inevitable. It was theirs to shape, theirs to lead, and together they would build a world that would carry the citadel's legacy forward into the unknown. Whatever came next, they would face it as one, their destinies forever intertwined with the hum that had brought them here. The moment they moved forward, the air around them seemed to stretch, expanding with every step they took, as though the citadel itself were not just a space but a vast, living organism. Every shift, every change in the hum echoed through them both, reverberating in their bones, syncing with their pulse. The walls, the light, the very fabric of the citadel responded to their presence now, moving and shifting like something ancient awakening from a long slumber. It was no longer just a building, it was a world, and they were the ones shaping its next breath. As they walked, the girl remained silent beside him, but her presence was undeniable. She no longer needed words, for there was a shared understanding between them, a bond forged not just by the journey they had taken, but by something deeper, something that had always been there, quietly pulling them together. They had unlocked the citadel, yes, but now they were its stewards, its creators. Together they were the beginning of something new, something vast and unexplored. The light around them, once soft and distant, had taken on a new intensity. It pulsed now in time with the hum, as if it were alive, its glow becoming brighter. With each step they took, it wasn't just illuminating their path, it was guiding them, urging them forward, pushing them towards something unknown, something that awaited them at the heart of the citadel. They reached the center of the space, and the hum intensified, resonating through the very air, filling every corner of the room with its energy. The orb, still in his hand, pulsed with the same rhythm, its glow brighter now, almost blinding. It was as though the citadel itself had drawn them here, to this exact moment, this place, to unlock the final piece of its puzzle. He could feel the weight of it pressing against him, but there was no fear. Only a deep, quiet knowing that they were where they were meant to be. The girl stepped forward, and as she did, the citadel seemed to react, the space around them shifting in response to her movement. She reached out, her hand brushing his, and for a moment everything felt still, as if the citadel itself were holding its breath, waiting for them to take the next step. They stood there, hands touching, the hum vibrating through them both, and for a moment it felt as if time itself had stopped, as though the future was unfolding in front of them, waiting for them to define it. The walls around them seemed to bend, the light shifting once again, and in that shift they saw it, the heart of the citadel, a core of energy that pulsed with life, bright and alive. It wasn't a structure, not a thing that could be touched or held, but a presence, an energy that filled the room, surrounding them, enveloping them. It was the citadel's essence, its soul, and it was now theirs to shape. He could feel it deep. Inside him, a pull toward that energy, a pull to step into it, to become one with it. And as his gaze met the girl's, he saw the same understanding in her eyes. She, too, felt the pull. Together they had unlocked the citadel's power, and now it was theirs to guide. The future, the path ahead, was no longer a mystery. It was clear, bright, and filled with infinite possibility. He took a step forward, and the girl followed, her hand still in his. As they approached the core of energy, the hum grew louder, more insistent, until it was no longer just a sound. It was a force, a power that surged through them, filling their hearts with its rhythm, urging them to become part of it. And as they stood at the center of the citadel, they both felt it. This was the moment when everything they had done, everything they had unlocked, would come to fruition. They were no longer just creators. They were the citadel's future, its heart. And together they would shape it, guide it, and carry it into the next chapter. The energy around them pulsed once more, as if the citadel itself were awakening to its new beginning, a beginning they had created. And with that realization, the weight of it all settled around them, not as a burden, but as a gift that they would carry forward together. The energy around them surged with a power so palpable it seemed to have a weight of its own, wrapping around them, pushing them forward, urging them to embrace it fully. The citadel, once an unknown, mysterious force, had become a living, breathing thing under their guidance, pulsing with life, energy, and purpose. It was no longer just a structure. It was a manifestation of their creation, an extension of themselves. He could feel it deep within him, a connection stronger than anything he had ever known, like the hum of the citadel was now part of his very soul. With every step he took, the energy resonated within him, vibrating through his bones, syncing with his heartbeat. He wasn't just walking through this space, he was a part of it. His movements shaped the air around him, the very space responding to his presence. Beside him, the girl moved with the same fluidity, the same steady grace. Her quiet, constant presence seemed to amplify the hum between them, their connection growing deeper, more inseparable. She had always been the calm in the storm, the grounding force, but now he realized she was as much a part of this as he was. They had both become more than just stewards of the citadel. They were its very heartbeat, its foundation, its future. They reached the center of the space once again, where the energy seemed to concentrate, pulsing in waves, swirling around them, enveloping them in its glow. It was brighter now, not blinding, but illuminating, as if the very core of the citadel was alive with purpose. The walls shimmered, their once still surfaces now rippling with an almost fluid motion, as if responding to the energy that flowed between them. He reached out, his fingers brushing against the air, and felt the power surge through him. It wasn't just the citadel anymore, it was them. Their presence, their intention, their connection had merged with the hum, transforming the space into something greater. The citadel was no longer just a place, it was a living being, and they were its creators, its lifeblood. The girl stepped closer, her hand finding his once again. Their touch, though simple, seemed to anchor the space around them, as though they were grounding the very energy of the citadel itself. They had come together, unlocked its potential, and now they stood as the heart of it all, the center of its existence. And then a shift, a subtle but undeniable change. The hum, once a constant companion, now seemed to grow quieter, more distant. It was as though the citadel had reached a tipping point, a moment when it was no longer dependent on their presence, but rather it was their presence that had become one with it. The energy around them didn't diminish, but it shifted, becoming a part of them, echoing in their minds, their hearts. The citadel had become theirs, and now they were ready to carry it forward. The girl looked at him, her eyes filled with an understanding that mirrored his own. They had unlocked the citadel's true purpose, had shaped it into something more than just a place. It was a world, a living, breathing force that they had awakened, and now they had to decide what to do with it, where to take it. He took a deep breath, the weight of the responsibility settling on his shoulders. But it was not a burden. It was a gift, a chance to shape something eternal, something that would resonate far beyond the walls of the citadel. The future was open to them, a blank canvas waiting to be painted with their intentions. Together they stepped forward once more, the citadel's energy still swirling around them, but now it was not a force to be feared or controlled. It was a force to be embraced, to be guided. And as they moved forward side by side, they knew that whatever came next, whatever shape the citadel would take, it would be a reflection of them, of their choices, of the future they would create together. The hum, now more of a whisper than a roar, seemed to guide them forward, not as a presence pushing them, but as a promise that whatever lay ahead would be theirs to define. The citadel had waited for them to step into its heart, and now, together, they would carry it into the future. The silence between them grew thick, not from uncertainty, but from the weight of the unspoken understanding that had settled between them. They had come this far, and now, standing at the heart of the citadel, they felt the pull of a new beginning. An uncharted world laid before them, its boundaries undefined, its possibilities endless. The hum that had filled the air for so long had softened, no longer the overwhelming force it once was. Now it seemed like a whisper, a quiet call guiding them, telling them that the path forward was theirs to carve. He glanced at the girl, her presence beside him as constant as the pulse of the citadel. She had always been the stillness, the quiet strength, and now, as they stood together at the precipice of this new world, her gaze reflected the same quiet certainty that filled his own chest. They were not just part of this place. They were the architects, the ones who would shape its future. And the future was vast, unpredictable, and full of promise. He could feel the energy shifting around them, the citadel adapting to their presence, to their decisions. The walls seemed to bend and stretch, responding to the very force of their intentions. Every breath they took seemed to ripple through the space, shaping it, molding it into something new. The light, which had once been a soft glow, now pulsed, with a stronger intensity, illuminating the path before them, casting long shadows that twisted and turned, as if the citadel itself was shifting its form in response to their movements. There was no longer any need to hurry, no sense of urgency. They were not merely following a path anymore, they were creating it. Every step they took felt deliberate, measured, as if each movement had the power to change the very fabric of the world around them. The citadel, once a vast and unknowable entity, was now alive with their energy, responding to their choices, waiting for them to define its next chapter. He stepped forward, the girl following closely behind, and for a moment the space around them seemed to open, expanding outward in every direction. The walls that had once seemed imposing now felt welcoming, the air thick with the hum of life, of creation. The citadel had never felt more alive than it did in this moment, and he realized that it wasn't just the walls or the structure, it was the energy that flowed through it, the force they had unlocked together that had brought it to life. Their path was not defined by the past or the future. It was something entirely new. As they moved deeper into the citadel's heart, the light continued to shift, its glow becoming more vibrant, more alive. He reached out, his hand brushing the surface of the walls, and felt the warmth of it pulse beneath his fingers. It wasn't just energy, it was life, breathing, responding, evolving with every movement they made. And then they reached the center of it all. The space before them stretched wide, the energy radiating from the heart of the citadel like a living entity. The hum had grown quiet once more, settling into a steady, rhythmic pulse that seemed to echo through the very air. The walls around them shimmered, and for the first time he realized they weren't just in a room anymore. They were in the very essence of the citadel, its core, its soul. He turned to the girl, her gaze steady, her presence unwavering. Together they had unlocked this place, had shaped it, but now they were faced with a decision, a choice about what came next. The citadel was no longer a passive structure. It was alive, evolving, and they were the ones who would guide its next steps. The future wasn't something they would discover. It was something they would create. Together they stood at the heart of this new world, its pulse beating in time with their own. The citadel had given them its trust, its power, and now it was up to them to decide what they would do with it. The possibilities were endless, but there was a quiet certainty in his heart. They had the power to shape this, to guide it, to take the citadel's legacy and build something new. The girl's hand brushed his once more, a silent promise, an unspoken agreement that whatever came next, they would face it together. Their Weishvik journey was no longer just a discovery, it was a creation. And in that moment, as they stood in the heart of the citadel, they knew they were ready to shape the future, to carve their place in its legacy. Whatever came next, they would build it, side by side. The space around them seemed to hum with a quiet energy, the air thick with anticipation, but also with an undeniable sense of purpose. The citadel had changed, its once static walls now fluid, alive with the same rhythm that echoed through their bodies. It felt as though everything, every thought, every movement, every decision they made was somehow shaping the world around them, as though the citadel was not just responding to them, but becoming part of them. They were no longer just creators, they were conduits for something much larger, something ancient and timeless that had always existed within the citadel, waiting for this moment. He could feel it in his chest, this connection. The hum, once a distant and gentle presence, was now a powerful force, vibrating through him with each breath. The air seemed to hold its own weight, like it was charged with the energy of creation itself. The walls stretched and pulsed in time with the hum, and the light that surrounded them had become not just illumination, but life itself, filled with the potential of what they were about to unlock. Beside him, the girl moved with a quiet, deliberate grace, as if every step was in perfect harmony with the world around them. He had always known she was different, always understood that there was more to her than met the eye, but now he saw it clearly. Her presence was not just a comfort, it was a guiding force, as integral to this journey as the hum itself. She had become a part of this world just as much as he had, their destinies intertwined in ways that were beyond their comprehension. They had come so far, and now, standing at the heart of the citadel, the future was open before them. It wasn't just a space to explore or a place to uncover. It was a living entity, its soul laid bare before them, and they were the ones who would decide its next chapter. The weight of this realization hung heavy in the air, but it was not a burden. It was a gift, a responsibility they had been chosen for, and one they were ready to embrace. The walls, once cold and distant, now felt warm, as though they were embracing them, welcoming them into the heart of this living world. The energy in the air shifted again, pulsing with an intensity that sent a ripple through their bodies, and he could feel the hum deep within him, resonating with every breath, with every beat of his heart. This was no longer just the Citadel's energy. It was theirs, a force they had unlocked together, a power they now wielded. He turned to the girl, his eyes meeting hers, and in that moment he knew that they were ready. The path ahead was no longer uncertain. They had unlocked the Citadel's potential, and now, together, they would guide it into a new era. Whatever came next, whatever challenges they would face, they would do so side by side, bound by the hum, bound by the Citadel, and by the knowledge that they had become its creators. Without a word, they stepped forward again, the space around, them shifting in response to their movement. It was not just the Citadel that was changing now, it was them. They were part of this world, part of its essence, and as they moved they could feel it. This was no longer a journey of discovery, it was a journey of creation, and they were the ones who would shape what came next. The hum, now a steady pulse, guided them forward, and as they continued to walk through the Citadel, the space around them seemed to grow even larger, more expansive, as if it were opening up, waiting for them to define it. The energy between them, between the girl and himself, had become one with the Citadel. They were no longer separate from it. They were part of its living, breathing soul. And in that moment, as they walked deeper into the heart of the Citadel, he understood that the journey had never been just about unlocking its power. It had been about unlocking theirs. They had become the key, the creators, the stewards of this world, and now it was theirs to shape. The future, once an uncertain horizon, was now a canvas, and together they would paint it with the possibilities they had unlocked. Whatever came next, whatever choices lay ahead, they would face them with the certainty that they had the power to shape them, to mold them into something new, something enduring. The Citadel had always been waiting for them, and now, as its creators, they were ready to guide it into the next chapter of its existence. And with each step, the hum grew stronger, filling the space with the promise of what they were about to create. They continued to walk through the Citadel, the steady pulse of the hum guiding them like an invisible thread that connected their every step to the very heart of the place. It was no longer just about moving through space. It was about feeling it, breathing it, becoming one with it. The walls, once distant and imposing, now felt like extensions of themselves, bending and shifting in response to their presence. The Citadel was no longer a passive environment. It was active, living, growing with them. As they moved deeper into the Citadel, the space seemed to stretch and expand as though it were responding to their thoughts, their intentions. The light shifted, not harsh but soft, wrapping around them in a warm, embracing glow. It was as if the Citadel itself had recognized their purpose, had understood that they were no longer just visitors in its vast halls, but its creators, its future. The girl walked beside him, her presence as constant and unwavering as ever. He could feel the connection between them deepening, an unspoken understanding that had always existed but was now clearer than ever. They had always been a part of this journey, but now, as they moved together through the Citadel, they were more than just participants. They were the ones who would shape its future. Together they had unlocked something powerful, and now they were the ones who would decide what to do with it. The air around them seemed to vibrate, not with the intensity of chaos, but with the quiet pulse of life, of creation. It was as though everything in the Citadel was waiting for them to take the next step to define its future. The walls seemed to respond to their movements, their thoughts, as if they were guiding them towards something that had been waiting to be unlocked. He could feel the weight of the moment settling on his shoulders, but it was not a burden. It was a gift, an invitation to shape something that would endure beyond them. The citadel had always been alive, but now it was more than just a place. It was a living entity, and they were its stewards. They were the ones who would decide what came next. And then, as they reached the center of the citadel, everything seemed to slow. The hum faded, not in a way that was oppressive, but in a way that felt like the citadel was holding its breath, waiting for them to act. The light around them seemed to pause, the walls still, and for a moment there was nothing but the feeling of being on the edge of something monumental. The girl, still beside him, turned toward him, her eyes meeting his with a quiet, steady understanding. Without words, they both knew what needed to be done. They had come this far, unlocked the citadel's power, but now it was time to define what it would become. They had the tools, the energy, and the connection to shape it, but it was up to them to decide what form it would take. Together they stepped forward, their movements in sync, and the citadel responded. The walls began to shift once more, the light growing brighter, more focused. The energy around them pulsed with a new intensity, but this time it was not a force pushing them, it was a force waiting to be shaped, waiting for them to decide its direction. The citadel was no longer a passive entity waiting to be unlocked, it was alive with potential, and they were the ones who would guide it forward. As they stood at the center, the energy around them began to coalesce into something new. It wasn't just light or sound, it was life itself, a force waiting to be molded, shaped into something that would carry the citadel's legacy forward. The walls rippled as if breathing with them, the air thick with the weight of their choices. He took a deep breath, the reality of it settling on him. This was their moment, their choice. They had unlocked the citadel, but now it was time to give it form. The power was theirs, and together they would decide what it would become. The future was open, a canvas waiting to be painted, and they had the brush. Whatever came next, whatever challenges they faced, they would face it together. The girl, standing beside him, took a step closer, her hand brushing his once again, and in that simple gesture, the citadel seemed to respond, the hum growing stronger, filling the space with energy. It wasn't overwhelming, it was steady, guiding them. And in that moment, he knew they were ready, not just to guide the citadel, but to become part of it, shaping its future as it shaped theirs. Whatever came next, they would face it as one, together, creators of a new world, a new future. The citadel seemed to pulse with life around them, the walls breathing with every movement, the air heavy with the energy that now surrounded them. The hum had reached a steady, rhythmic pulse, no longer an overwhelming force, but a presence that connected them to the very heart of this place. It was no longer simply a guide, it was a part of them, just as they were part of it. He could feel it deep within him now, a quiet but constant pull, as if the citadel was waiting for them to step into something greater. The girl, still beside him, walked with the same grace, her every step in time with the energy that flowed through the space. They had unlocked the citadel's potential, but now it was clear. It was their time to shape it, to guide it forward into a new era. Every step felt like a choice, like they were both walking through the fabric of the future, stitching together the path that lay ahead. The walls seemed to ripple in response, the energy around them pulsing and shifting, waiting for their next move. It was as though the very space was alive with possibility, and they were the ones who held the power to guide it. The girl's eyes met his, and for a moment there was no need for words. They both understood what had to be done. They had unlocked the citadel, but now it was up to them to decide what it would become. The future wasn't something they would discover. It was something they would create. The citadel's energy swirled around them, the hum growing louder again, but this time it was not a force to be feared. It was a force to be embraced, to be shaped. Together they had unlocked the secrets of this place, and now it was their turn to shape its legacy. He reached out, his hand brushing against the shifting walls, feeling the warmth of the energy. Beneath his fingers, it wasn't just a wall, it was a living thing responding to him, to them. Every inch of the citadel seemed to be attuned to their presence, as though it had always been waiting for this moment. They were no longer just part of its future. They were its creators, its guides. As they moved forward, the citadel seemed to open up in front of them, its energy flowing in new directions, creating pathways where there had once been none. The light around them shifted, brightening, as if the citadel were waking up fully, shedding its old skin and emerging into something new. The walls, once cold and unyielding, now seemed to bend in response to them, shaping themselves into new forms, new possibilities. He could feel the weight of it. This was their moment, their responsibility. They had unlocked something powerful, but now it was up to them to decide how it would unfold. There were no more questions, no more uncertainties. They were the ones who would shape the future, who would decide what the citadel would become. The girl's hand found his once again, and they both stopped, standing in the center of this new space, the hum still filling the air, steady and constant. In that moment he realized that they had always been part of this. The citadel had always been waiting for them, and now they were the ones who would shape its next chapter. Together, they had unlocked its potential, its power, and now it was time to decide what to do with it. They had the keys to its future, but the future itself was open, a vast canvas waiting to be painted. Whatever came next, whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. As the hum continued, quiet yet profound, they stood at the heart of the citadel, ready to shape the world around them. The walls no longer felt like obstacles, they were possibilities, waiting to be explored, waiting to be defined, and with each step they would carve a path forward, creating a future that would carry the citadel's legacy into a new era. They were not just creators, they were the architects of everything that would come next, the stewards of a world that had only just begun. The citadel seemed to grow with them, every step they took, pushing it further, deeper, into the unknown. The energy in the air was thick with potential, as though the very ground beneath them was reshaping itself, expanding with every thought, every breath. They were no longer just part of the citadel's history, they were its future, and it was a future that stretched out before them, wide and uncharted. He could feel the pulse of it, deep in his chest, a steady beat that was not just the hum of the citadel, but the rhythm of something greater. It was a heartbeat, not of this world alone, but of everything that was, everything that would be. The light around them shifted again, the air becoming more vibrant, almost electric. Every inch of the space responded to their presence, as though the citadel itself was waking up, fully alive for the first time. The girl stood beside him, her eyes reflecting the same quiet intensity that he felt. She had always been his anchor, his steady presence in the storm of this journey, but now, as they moved forward, there was no question left. They were not just uncovering the secrets of the Citadel, they were becoming its creators. Together they were unlocking something powerful, something that had been waiting for them all along. And now the Citadel was offering them its full potential, its heart. They walked in silence, each step forward feeling like a step into the unknown. The walls around them no longer felt like obstacles. They were part of the landscape now, responsive and alive, bending and shifting to match the pace of their journey. The path ahead was open, vast, but with every movement it felt like they were shaping it, molding it into something new, something that had never existed before. He reached out, his fingers grazing the surface of one of the walls, and as he did, it rippled under his touch, shifting and reshaping. It was not just the Citadel responding, it was them too. The very air seemed to pulse with their intentions, with the energy they had unlocked together. He turned to the girl, and in that brief glance he saw the same understanding in her eyes. They had unlocked this power, but now they were the ones who would decide what it would become. It was no longer about following the hum, about listening to the Citadel's rhythm. They were its creators now, and it was their choice to shape the world around them, to build something that would stand the test of time. The hum, once a distant whisper, now felt like the pulse of their own hearts. It was no longer a force outside of them. It was them. The Citadel's heart beat in time with theirs. As they continued forward, the space seemed to open up even more, the walls becoming more fluid, more organic, like a living thing. The air around them was charged, humming with energy, but it wasn't overwhelming. It was empowering, as though every corner of the Citadel was waiting for them to decide what would come next. The possibilities were endless, but the weight of it wasn't daunting, it was exhilarating. They reached a new space, one that felt different from the rest. The light here was softer, warmer, the energy in the air more concentrated. It felt like the heart of the Citadel, a place where everything converged. And here, in the center of it all, was where their creation would begin. It was a blank canvas stretching out before them, ready to be painted with their vision. He paused, letting the stillness settle around them, feeling the weight of the moment. This was it. The future, their future, was right in front of them. They had unlocked the potential of the Citadel, but now it was time to build, to decide what it would become, what it would offer to the world beyond. And he knew, without question, that they were ready. The girl stepped closer, her presence grounding him, and without a word, they both knew what needed to be done. Together they reached out, their hands brushing the surface of the Citadel's heart. The energy surged around them, not overwhelming, but flowing in sync with their intentions. They were no longer separate from the Citadel. They were part of it, its creators, its stewards. The Citadel was alive with their decisions, alive with their choices, and as they stood at its heart, they knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. Their future was intertwined with the Citadel's, and they had the power to shape it into something that would echo through time. It was no longer just a place, it was a new world, and they were the ones who would create it, side by side. The energy in the air was thick with anticipation. Every breath they took heavy with the weight of what was unfolding. The Citadel was no longer just a place they moved through. It had become an extension of themselves, an entity they had unlocked and were now shaping. The space around them felt different now, less like a labyrinth of stone and more like a living world breathing, pulsing with life and possibility. Every step forward seemed to echo, not just in the chambers around them, but deep within. It was as though the citadel itself was listening, waiting for their guidance, their choices to shape the world. He could feel the power of it, the hum vibrating through his body, resonating with every thought and intention they had. The walls, the light, the air, they all responded to them, bending and shifting in subtle ways, as if the citadel itself was eager to change, to evolve with them. He turned to the girl, and for a moment they both stood in silence, the weight of everything. They had unlocked settling around them. It wasn't a burden, it was freedom. The future was open before them, an infinite expanse of potential that they could shape with their hands, their will, their vision. The citadel had shown them the way, but now it was their turn to decide what would come next. Her gaze met his, calm yet steady, filled with the same understanding. Together they had come this far, together they had unlocked the citadel's heart, its power, and now they were the ones who would define what it would become. The energy that flowed through them, through the citadel, was theirs to guide. Every movement they made, every choice they made, would leave its mark on the world they were shaping. They took a step forward, and the walls around them shifted in response, the space expanding, opening up before them. The light around them brightened, not blinding but illuminating, as if the citadel itself was revealing its true potential to them, waiting for them to fill the vastness with their vision. The hum grew louder, no longer distant or overwhelming, but a steady, resonant presence that seemed to echo in time with their heart. This was it, the moment they had both been building toward. The future was not something they were waiting for. It was something they were creating. The citadel had offered them its power, its trust, and now they had the responsibility to shape it, to guide it. And as they moved further into the heart of the citadel, they understood that this was not just their moment, it was the moment of every soul that had ever come before them, every echo of the past, every whisper of potential. They were not just standing at the threshold of the future, they were the ones who would step into it. The citadel's hum, once a distant memory, now filled the air, steady and sure. It was their rhythm, their heartbeat. It wasn't pushing them forward anymore, it was flowing with them, a reflection of everything they had unlocked together. They were no longer simply explorers in this world. They were the ones who would create it, guide it, shape it. Together, they had the power to build something that would endure far beyond them, far beyond the citadel's walls. He felt the hum intensify as they walked, the energy around them swirling, bending in time with their movements. The air seemed to shimmer with possibility, the very space alive with the choices they were about to make. The walls around them felt closer now, but not in a confining way. They were no longer boundaries. They were possibilities, waiting to be shaped, waiting to be filled with the future they were creating. The girl's hand brushed his once again, a simple gesture, but one that echoed with everything they had unlocked. Together, they had become part of this world, and, together, they would shape what came next. Their choices, their decisions would carry the citadel forward into a future that was theirs to define. And as they moved deeper into the citadel, the space seemed to respond, to adapt, to change. The hum that had once been distant, guiding them from the shadows, was now a part of them, as much a part of the citadel as the walls, the light, the energy that surrounded them. It was their world now. The future was open, and together they would fill it with what they had unlocked. The space around them seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting in time with their steps. Every inch of the citadel responded to them now, every wall, every surface, every breath of air. It was as though the very structure was not only aware of their presence, but had become part of them, a living reflection of their intentions. With each passing moment, they felt the weight of their decisions sink deeper, the magnitude of what they had unlocked. The citadel wasn't just a place anymore, it was a world, and they were the ones who held the keys to its future. They walked side by side, the hum in the air steady and constant, like the pulse of the citadel's heart, but also their own. It was no longer a force outside of them, pulling them forward. It was a connection, a shared rhythm between them and the citadel itself. The girl's presence beside him was a comfort, an anchor. But there was more now, something deeper, something unspoken but known between them. Their destinies were no longer separate. They had become one with the citadel, and in doing so, they had become the architects of its future. The walls around them seemed to shimmer, alive with the same energy that flowed through them both. The light shifted as they moved, not just illuminating, but guiding, showing them the way forward. Every step they took felt like they were carving a path through the unknown, but with each movement, the world around them adapted, shifting in sync with their intentions. It was as if the citadel was no longer waiting for them to unlock its secrets. It was waiting for them to define what it would become. He felt the weight of that truth settle over him. The citadel was not a static thing. It was alive, changing, growing with them. And it was up to them to decide how it would evolve. They were no longer explorers wandering through a place of mystery. They were creators, shaping the world around them with every thought, every choice. The citadel had shown them its heart, but now it was time to shape it, to give it purpose. The girl's gaze met his, and in that moment they shared a quiet understanding. There were no more uncertainties, no more questions. They knew what had to be done. Together they had unlocked the power of the citadel, and now they would guide it into the future. The light grew brighter, and the air around them hummed with the promise of what was to come. They reached the center of the space, where the energy seemed to concentrate, as if the citadel's very heart beat here, waiting for them to define it. The hum grew louder, more intense, but it didn't feel overwhelming. It felt like the steady beat of their own hearts, synchronized with the pulse of the citadel. The light here was different, warmer, more focused, as if it were not just illuminating the space, but responding to their presence, their choices. He reached out, his fingers brushing against the surface of the central energy, and for the first time, it felt like he was not just touching something, he was becoming part of it. The energy surged through him, not as a force outside of him, but as a part of him, flowing through his veins, sinking with his breath. It was as though the citadel had always been waiting for this moment, for them to become one, to shape its future together. The girl stepped closer, her hand finding his again, and they stood there, connected, both to each other and to the citadel. The space around them seemed to hum with life, with possibility. The energy that had once felt like a guiding force was now a part of them, waiting for them to shape it, to lead it. And in that moment, he knew. This was their moment. The citadel was no longer something they were discovering. It was something they were creating. Together they would decide what came next. The future was open before them, a canvas waiting to be painted with their vision, their intentions. The citadel had been their guide, but now it was time to be the creators, the ones who would shape this new world. And as they stood there, hands intertwined, at the heart of the citadel, they knew this was just the beginning. Whatever came next, they would face it together, shaping the world around them with every step. The citadel pulsed around them, its rhythm now inseparable from their own. Every breath they took seemed to resonate with the hum that filled the air, its energy weaving through their bodies like a shared heartbeat. There was no longer any separation between them and this place. They were part of it, and it was part of them. The walls, the air, the very light seemed to bend in response to their thoughts, shifting with each passing moment, adapting to the intentions they held. He looked at the girl beside him, her presence as steady as ever. But now there was something different in her eyes. They had come so far together, and now, standing at the heart of the citadel, they shared an unspoken understanding. This was their creation, their world to shape, and the weight of that responsibility settled over them. But it wasn't a burden. It was a gift. A chance to build something that would echo through time, something that would endure beyond them. The air around them seemed to shimmer, charged with the energy they had unlocked, and the space ahead of them stretched out, open and full of possibility. The citadel was no longer a passive witness to their journey. It had become a part of them, and they, in turn, had become part of its legacy. The walls around them no longer felt like barriers. They felt like gateways, each one leading to a new realm of possibilities, a new chapter to be written. He reached out, his hand brushing the surface of the wall, and felt a ripple of energy flow through him, as though the very fabric of the citadel was alive, responding to his touch. It was as if it recognized him now, not just as a traveler, but as a creator, a part of its future. The light around them flickered, brightening in response, and for the first time he understood. The citadel had been waiting for this moment, waiting for them to shape its destiny. The girl's hand found his, and together they stood at the center of it all, not just as visitors, but as co-creators, the ones who would guide the citadel into its next phase. The energy in the air thickened, and the walls seemed to move, not with haste, but with purpose, as though the entire structure was aligning itself with their intentions. There was no fear now, no uncertainty. There was only the certainty of their bond and the shared vision of what was to come. The hum around them grew louder, but it wasn't overwhelming. It was steady, a constant presence that filled the space like the sound of a heart beating in time with their own. The citadel was alive, and they were at its core, its heart, its guiding force. They had unlocked its potential, but now it was up to them to decide what it would become. They took a step forward together, and the citadel responded, the walls, bending to reveal new pathways, new opportunities. It wasn't just the physical space that was shifting, it was the very essence of the citadel, its energy and its purpose being reshaped by their choices. They were no longer just part of the journey. They were leading it, shaping it, and the future of the citadel was now in their hands. As they walked, the energy around them swirled like a living force, responding to their every move, their every thought. The light grew brighter, more focused, as if the citadel itself was coming into full realization, taking shape around them. And in that moment he understood that this was not an ending, it was a beginning. They were not simply stepping into the future, they were creating it. With each step, the world around them grew, expanded, and took on new life. The walls, the light, the air, everything was a reflection of the choices they made, the path they were carving together. And as they moved deeper into the heart of the citadel, they knew that they were not just its creators. They were its future, its legacy, and whatever came next, they would face it as one, shaping it, molding it together. They walked side by side, the hum in the air steady and constant, like the pulse of the citadel's heart, but also their own. It was no longer a force outside of them, pulling them forward. It was a connection, a shared rhythm between them and the citadel itself. The girl's presence beside him was a comfort, an anchor. But there was more now, something deeper, something unspoken but known between them. Their destinies were no longer separate. They had become one with the citadel, and in doing so, they had become the architects of its future. The walls around them seemed to shimmer, alive with the same energy that flowed through them both. The light shifted as they moved, not just illuminating, but guiding, showing them the way forward. Every step they took felt like they were carving a path through the unknown, but with each movement, the world around them adapted, shifting in sync with their intentions. It was as if the citadel was no longer waiting for them to unlock its secrets. It was waiting for them to define what it would become. He felt the weight of that truth settle over him. The citadel was not a static thing. It was alive, changing, growing with them. And it was up to them to decide how it would evolve. They were no longer explorers wandering through a place of mystery. They were creators, shaping the world around them with every thought, every choice. The citadel had shown them its heart, but now it was time to shape it, to give it purpose. The girl's gaze met his, and in that moment they shared a quiet understanding. There were no more uncertainties, no more questions. They knew what had to be done. Together they had unlocked the power of the citadel, and now they would guide it into the future. The light grew brighter, and the air around them hummed with the promise of what was to come. They reached the center of the space, where the energy seemed to concentrate, as if the citadel's very heart beat here, waiting for them to define it. The hum grew louder, more intense, but it didn't feel overwhelming. It felt like the steady beat of their own hearts, synchronized with the pulse of the citadel. The light here was different, warmer, more focused, as if it were not just illuminating the space, but responding to their presence, their choices. He reached out, his fingers brushing against the surface of the central energy, and for the first time, it felt like he was not just touching something, he was becoming part of it. The energy surged through him, not as a force outside of him, but as a part of him, flowing through his veins, sinking with his breath. It was as though the citadel had always been waiting for this moment, for them to become one, to shape its future together. The girl stepped closer, her hand finding his again, and they stood there, connected, both to each other and to the citadel. The space around them seemed to hum with life, with possibility. The energy that had once felt like a guiding force was now a part of them, waiting for them to shape it, to lead it. And in that moment, he knew. This was their moment. The citadel was no longer something they were discovering. It was something they were creating. Together they would decide what came next. The future was open before them, a canvas waiting to be painted with their vision, their intentions. The citadel had been their guide, but now it was time to be the creators, the ones who would shape this new world. And as they stood there, hands intertwined, at the heart of the citadel, they knew this was just the beginning. Whatever came next, they would face it together, shaping the world around them with every step. The citadel pulsed around them, its rhythm now inseparable from their own. Every breath they took seemed to resonate with the hum that filled the air, its energy weaving through their bodies like a shared heartbeat. There was no longer any separation between them and this place. They were part of it, and it was part of them. The walls, the air, the very light seemed to bend in response to their thoughts, shifting with each passing moment, adapting to the intentions they held. He looked at the girl beside him, her presence as steady as ever. But now there was something different in her eyes. They had come so far together, and now, standing at the heart of the citadel, they shared an unspoken understanding. This was their creation, their world to shape, and the weight of that responsibility settled over them. But it wasn't a burden. It was a gift. A chance to build something that would echo through time, something that would endure beyond them. The air around them seemed to shimmer, charged with the energy they had unlocked, and the space ahead of them stretched out, open and full of possibility. The citadel was no longer a passive witness to their journey. It had become a part of them, and they, in turn, had become part of its legacy. The walls around them no longer felt like barriers. They felt like gateways, each one leading to a new realm of possibilities, a new chapter to be written. He reached out, his hand brushing the surface of the wall, and felt a ripple of energy flow through him, as though the very fabric of the citadel was alive, responding to his touch. It was as if it recognized him now, not just as a traveler, but as a creator, a part of its future. The light around them flickered, brightening in response, and for the first time he understood. The citadel had been waiting for this moment, waiting for them to shape its destiny. The girl's hand found his, and together they stood at the center of it all, not just as visitors, but as co-creators, the ones who would guide the citadel into its next phase. The energy in the air thickened, and the walls seemed to move, not with haste, but with purpose, as though the entire structure was aligning itself with their intentions. There was no fear now, no uncertainty. There was only the certainty of their bond and the shared vision of what was to come. The hum around them grew louder, but it wasn't overwhelming. It was steady, a constant presence that filled the space like the sound of a heart beating in time with their own. The citadel was alive, and they were at its core, its heart, its guiding force. They had unlocked its potential, but now it was up to them to decide what it would become. They took a step forward together, and the citadel responded, the walls, bending to reveal new pathways, new opportunities. It wasn't just the physical space that was shifting, it was the very essence of the citadel, its energy and its purpose being reshaped by their choices. They were no longer just part of the journey. They were leading it, shaping it, and the future of the citadel was now in their hands. As they walked, the energy around them swirled like a living force, responding to their every move, their every thought. The light grew brighter, more focused, as if the citadel itself was coming into full realization, taking shape around them. And in that moment he understood that this was not an ending, it was a beginning. They were not simply stepping into the future, they were creating it. With each step, the world around them grew, expanded, and took on new life. The walls, the light, the air. Everything was a reflection of the choices they made, the path they were carving together. And as they moved deeper into the heart of the citadel, they knew that they were not just its creators. They were its future, its legacy, and whatever came next, they would face it as one, shaping it, molding it together.